This is Kinsey, a public speaker, Miss O'Banky, the facilitator, Kaylin, a public speaker, Savannah, also a public speaker, and Natalie, a public speaker. What comes to your mind when you hear universal health care? Is it a peaceful utopia or ever-climbing tax rates and government bankruptcy? The idea is nice, not having to pay directly for medical treatment, but instead having it paid for by government-issued taxes. But what is the true cost? Which is why I'm here to talk to you today. To convince you that even though our system isn't perfect, universal healthcare would be a lot worse. My knowledge of this topic comes from weeks of research, which is why I am qualified to give this speech. To support my argument, I will be talking about the widespread loss of insurance jobs, how implementing this system would drain government funds, raise taxes beyond what could reasonably be paid, and lastly, government control and regulations. The first one is a good place to start. The widespread loss of insurance jobs. In Zipper, a career expert magazine, Jack Flynn stated, quote, "The United States insurance system employs 2.86 million employees," end quote. And he's written over 100 papers, which is part of why he is so qualified to talk about this topic. But universal healthcare has no room for insurance companies, so the government would have to shut these companies down. Then all these people would have to find work elsewhere. Not only would that be a long and tedious process and would affect everyone who relies on this insurance system and medicine in general, but in all likelihood, the federal government would have to buy out these companies and dissolve them. And we don't have enough money for that. In an article from III, Insurance Information Institute, they stated the United States insurance industry net premiums are written at a total of $1.4 trillion in 2021. This quote gives us an idea of the initial cost of converting to the system. As big as that number may seem, our debt is a much bigger number. 31 trillion, according to usdebtclock.org. And it's not just insurance companies that would get shut down, but any for-profit medical companies, pharmacies, labs, and factories that make medicine, which further worsen the before-mentioned problems of the economy. Now that we know the cost, let's talk about who it would land on. People, citizens, would have to pay the exorbitant tax rate to cover this cost. For the average family, whose paycheck mainly goes to keeping a roof over their head and food on the table, such a task is very difficult. How can you ask a man to pay for a paranoid stranger's medical visit when he needs that own food to pay for his own child? Inflation would not be much better and would be the cause if we were to just print money instead of using taxes, and why this isn't an available option. Inflation would be so insane if we were to switch to this system and try and use that solution, that it would take a wheelbarrow of cash to buy a loaf of bread. And in all honesty, things have a tendency to go wrong when put in the government's hands. That's why certain things never worked, like communism and certain other medical systems in other parts of the world. Overregulation by government can strongly affect the poor, as seen in this excerpt from an article in Forbes magazine's, quote, "A third study by Dustin Chambers, Patrick McGuffin, and Laura Stanley finds that more federal regulation is associated with more poverty at the state level. Using a measure of federal regulation burden imposed on each state, they find that a 10% increase in state regulation burden is associated with a 2.5 increase in the state's poverty rates, end quote. In other words, there is a direct line between increase in government regulation and the increase in the state's amount of poor, people living under the poverty line. The implication, if we were to go with universal health care, would greatly worsen this issue. And for that reason, we shouldn't try it. As I am finishing up this speech, it is my hope that based on the evidence provided regarding the widespread loss of insurance jobs, how implementing this system would drain government funds, raise taxes beyond what could reasonably be paid, and lastly, government control and regulations, that I have persuaded you that it is harmful to our nation to switch to a universal healthcare system, and that you understand the downsides that are often so overlooked.